I'm always the cold one. I've been freezing for a week. Has everybody else?
Yes.
It makes no sense, right? It's 73 degrees and we're freezing. What's going on? What's happening? It's not even north winds. It's not even, is it relative humidity? I don't understand. It's insane. Okay, so again, when we're talking about genre films, one of the things that I do like to mention is the adventure film, because I think that's the genre that has come to be most dominant. Right? Is it not? In the last 15 years, there's more adventure films being made than not. And I would argue there's a couple key differences that we see, especially in the adventure films of the first decade of the 21st century. And from my perspective, there was a similar message being sent over and over again. And it went something like this. You have a small micro society, right, that's going to go up against a vastly technologically superior army, right? And we saw this with The Last Samurai. We saw this with The Matrix. We saw this with Lord of the Rings. I could go on and on about how many, even in cartoons like Atlantis, we saw, again, this idea that there's a small micro-society that's formed, and their job is to take on a vastly superior, highly technological military. And the theme is that this small group of individuals going up against this technological army, that what they had on their side was their individuality. Right? That's their goodness, is that this highly technologized army has no individuality. And I'm just going to reference The Last Samurai, where the samurais are represented as the principled ones, as the individuals, the ones with a moral code. And the Japanese army, the emerging Japanese army, are depicted as being amoral. As having guns, and therefore having this technology seems to strip them of any type of humanity. And again, we see this theme repeated in The Matrix and many movies from this decade. And what I would argue would be that from the global perspective, in real time, the exact opposite was true. The exact opposite was happening on the global stage, where from the global stage, what we had the American army that seemed vast and highly technology-driven up against these small micro-societies that had in their favor morality. Now, we might not like to hear it, right? We might not want to look at it, but these cells of terrorists, that's exactly what their claim is. Right? Is that they're the ones that have a moral compass. They're the ones that have a moral code. They're the ones that are clinging to some type of ethical legitimacy, and they're taking on an army that has none from their perspective, that has no moral code, that's dropping bombs on them from drones, right? That isn't willing to do battle with them in on-the-ground combat, right? So it's a little bit interesting that while we as an army, as an American army, were engaging in military conduct that was very technological, without a clear moral compass, without individuality, right? All these elements that we pride ourselves on, and then we were going up against these small micro-societies. We're still going up against them. These small micro-societies that have in their favor that they're highly human, they have no technology, they have to figure out these sort of tricky ways to combat this dominant military presence. And I would argue, isn't it a nice fantasy that in our movies we had the reverse? Right? Isn't that cute? That in our movies we fantasized that exactly the opposite was taking place, that we were the underdogs. That we were the micro-society without the technology, that we were going up against the big bad guys, and we're somehow going to be heroic in our moral stance. I would argue the opposite was actually going on. And I think because of, and it's not an accident, right? Like, we needed to have that normative narrative in order to conduct ourselves on the global stage in that way. Now, alongside with those adventure narratives, then we had the other narratives that went something like this, more like Taken, More the vigilante, the man who now because of his moral superiority, because of his disenfranchised white male gaze, he now has donned the mantle of vigilante. And he is not bound to an ethical code of conduct because his moral imperative is to do whatever needs to be done. This is a very different ethical barometer than what we had in the 90s. I mean, in the 90s, you had heroes that were not allowed to shoot first. Right? In Terminator 2, you may recall, the Terminator was not allowed. The bad guys are coming out and the little boy's like, don't shoot them. And he's like, don't worry, I won't. I'm just shooting them in their knees. It's fine. Right? I would argue in Terminator 3, or Terminator 5 or whatever we're at now, he would just go ahead and shoot them all. That would be the ethical move. Right? There's no more rules of engagement. The good guys don't shoot first. This type of morality in terms of how we engage with the other, how do we use violence, has been largely eradicated. And again, the film that I point to that I think really puts the death nail in this is Taken. Is when you have this scene in Taken where the man is, you'll recall Liam Neeson, he's torturing a nondescript Middle Eastern, maybe Russian, I forget where they're from, somewhere distant, somewhere Balkan, somewhere, we don't, not really like us. And then he's torturing him to get information about his daughter. And he already knows that the man doesn't have information about his daughter, right? And then he's done torturing him, and he's walking, and he's the hero. Let's remember, he's the hero. And he walks out of the room, and he flips out. He goes, I don't know anything. The guy's like being tortured. I don't know anything. He's like, he basically, in sum, says, I know that you don't. Flips the switch, which is going to continue to electrocute him to death, and he walks out the room. Right? And I would argue that this is not a moment where we're just reifying the vigilante. It's not just a moment where we go, yes, do whatever you need to do in this situation. It's fine. I would argue it's a broader, especially for the moment when the film was made, that it's a broader social claim. It's saying, yes, torture is okay. Yes. I mean, at the very moment this film was being made, America was in a hot debate about, do we torture? Like, is torture something that we're going to do? Is it ethical? Is it just? We knew we were withholding the Geneva Convention from the prisoners of war that we were taking from Afghanistan. We knew that we were. And we knew that they were being tortured, maybe still are. And so we, in some way as a society, we had to grapple with, is it ethical? Is it ethical to torture? And I would argue that Taken was the final sort of declarative answer to that. Yes, it's ethical to torture as long as you have some sort of imperative, time-pressing need to do so. And I think that should be questioned. I don't know why it's not. And yet it seems to be de rigueur that we accept this. We now accept torture, we now accept the vigilante, we now accept this sort of no holds barred, just go for it. So that would be how I would see adventure representing to us back what we're doing as a culture. Now let's look a little bit more about horror film and what's going on with horror. Of course, I won't do anything as updated in 21st century with horror because I just am not like that. We'll go back to the 1950s immediately. But before we get there, let's take a little bit of look here about what exactly happens in horror movies. I mentioned Frankenstein and how for the 1930s, horror films really, and again, they were produced mostly at Universal. One of the things we should realize when we're talking about the studio system is that each studio produced certain films. So MGM, they had the biggest stars and they did the musical comedies. They did the happy, fun time movies, and they were hugely popular. Universal, slightly poorer studio, was doing sort of low budget horror movies. RKO, you had your Fred Astaire, your Ginger Rogers. They did a lot of those type of movies. And then you have like the B movies, the film noirs. You know what I mean? And those are being made and turned out, again, not as A-list celebrity movies, but as sort of B films, as were horror movies. They were not really intended to be the headliner of the evening. They were more a tease. So there wasn't a ton of money pumped into them, but again, we do see what society is afraid of. And every time we look at horror films, who the monster is tells us something about society, right? So again, in the 30s, the monster, is it Frankenstein or is it the mob? Right? And I do think in these movies in the 30s, you have pity for Frankenstein and you're afraid of the mob. Right? Mob rule is what's to be feared. So there's some implicit messages here that I think are very interesting. So the monster represents a threat to what is normal. So every time we're talking about a monster, be it the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s now, a monster is somebody who attacks the norm, somebody who's going to destabilize the status quo, trouble ideology. This includes the physical normality of what is safe and also the broader constructs of social categories. So the monster typically occupies the in-between, the normal, the abnormal, the human, animal, or the living and the dead. The monsters threaten the secure sense of human identity as it lies in relationship to the world of the dead, animals, or things. I'm going to take a detour here for a minute to one of our readings that I gave you, which was, I'm sure if you read it, you maybe it wasn't your favorite, maybe it was, but this would be Julia Kristeva's writing on objection. Anybody? Did you get to it already?
I remembered it from last.
Oh, that's so fun. Okay. All right, what do you remember about Kristeva?
I remembered objection and...
Define for me.
It's what we're afraid of. Like the bodily fluids.
Exactly, you got it. You got it. You got it. Yes. She doesn't want to say it, but she's exactly right. So this is kind of the way that it goes. As Julia Kristeva's, she's a very important. She would like to be called a French philosopher, but she's not really. If you look deeply, she wasn't actually French. But she wants to eviscerate that part of her history. It's fine. She wrote a very important book called The Powers of Horror in 1980, where she put forward this idea of the abject. Not the object, not the subject, but the abject. So the abject lies between the subject and the object. Right, so here I am, I'm a subject, here this is an object, what's happening in between? And she's putting forth this idea that there is a third, there is an in-between, and it's called the abject. Again, not subject, not object, the abject. And what constitutes the abject? Well, exactly what you said. Urine, feces, blood, spit. I could pull some hair off right now, my hair is usually shedding. That would be abject. So what do I mean by this? What these things are doing for me is they're displaying the porosity of my bodily boundaries, right? That we occupy, and this is going to go back, I'm going to do this really quick, it's not important. If you want to go back to Lacan, he pretty much says, I love that look when you looked at my writing. Yes, you should look that troubled. Yes, it doesn't make any sense. But Lacan pretty much says that the child's subjectivity is constituted by looking at himself, very clearly, a him, in the mirror stage. And it usually happens, he says 18 months. If you're a mother, you know that it's much sooner than that. That the child will, at some point, and this doesn't happen with chimpanzees, at some point, the child will recognize himself in the mirror as himself. And that moment of recognition is pretty much can be summed up as, that's me over there. So there's always this splitting. There's always this splitting where the subject is not self-identical, because in the recognition process, they're split. Their self is over there. And in that otherness, they see themselves as a two-dimensional object. And so what we do because of that two-dimensionality, have you seen babies in the middle of the mirror stage? They're so thrilled. They're like, they're like, it's the happiest they've ever been, just because they realize that's them over there. I'm moving my arm, the arm's moving, it's amazing, right? They will do it as long as they can. They love it. And what they're getting in this is not just self-recognition, but they're internalizing what Lacan calls the imago, the initial imago. And that, again, is a two-dimensional image of yourself. Now, don't worry, this isn't on the midterm. Now, what happens is, because you have an internalized two-dimensional idea about who you are, where is the place for your urine? Where is the place for your blood? Where is the place for all of these things that kind of come from your body and go out? I'll be very disgusting. So go ahead. When next time you're taking a shit in the toilet, when you look at the shit in the toilet, don't tell me you don't. You do. You look at it. Most of you, anyway. Tell me, do you think that shit is a part of you? Do you think it ever was a part of you?
No.
It was inside you. Aren't other things that are inside you a part of you? No, but not. What about your blood? When you cut yourself, who cut themselves recently?
What? I don't know.
You're not in the world getting cuts on your hands when you're cooking?
Oh, I thought you meant cut myself like.
Oh yeah, I'm assuming you're all cutters. Yeah, no. I'm hoping that you're beings for the world, and you're actually being rugged enough that you're getting nicked up and seeing your bodies being porous and having blood come out of it. When the blood comes out of your body because you've nicked it on a reef or cooking or whatever, is the blood part of you? No, it's not. Don't lie to me. No, it's not. You're stopping the blood. You're cleaning the blood. You're getting it off of you as quick. You're not going, oh, this precious part of me, let me save it and put it in a box. The blood is no longer a part of you once it's outside of you. This is her point, that somewhere, and we don't know where, but somewhere in the process of these things going from being on your body or in your body to going outside your body, they become other. They become something that must be, and this is where she gets, the abject is a noun, needs to be abjected, a verb. So she loves these linguistic games. So there's the abject, which tends to be this noun, porous, bodily stuff. And then there's being abjected, which is when you disavow it. And disavowal is different than denial. Disavowal is, I know, but nevertheless. That's how disavowal is structured. So after you've taken that shit in your toilet, you go, I know. I mean, you don't think this, but somehow in your subconscious it's structured this way. You go, I know that was a part of me. Nevertheless, flush the toilet. It's not. It's gone. Right? This is abjecting something. This is when you push it away from you. Right? And in fact, what she says is, in this motion of abjecting, you're reconstituting your proper body, what they call the clean and proper body. So actually sort of eliminating psychically the abject material and having it be sort of disgusting is by design, right? Because you're abjecting it. You're going, no, I don't want that. And that motion of abjecting the abject reconstitutes the self. It reconfigures the solidity of this kind of imaginary two-dimensional version of our bodies that we have. That is why there's the trauma over horror films. Is because horror films are all about transgressing what's clean and proper. Like showing you the hacked body, right? Showing you, and this is where I think the overlooked part of Kristeva really is, because there's also a part in her work where she says it's not just the abject material, it's the criminal. Right? Because the criminal displays the porosity of borders, right? The refugee would be abject. Because you could have the body, and then you can also have the body of the country, which also should have clean and proper borders, clean and proper laws. And so if you have a criminal, or if you have refugees that are penetrating these laws, that are penetrating these borders, they too are abject, and must be abjected. They must be eliminated in order to restore the proper, clean and proper body. And this is a lot of what we're seeing in horror films. Does this make sense? So you have male deviants, you have female deviants, you have abject material, and all of this needs to be eliminated, abjected, because they are abject. Because they show us this fantasy world we're living in. The bottom line, the 1-2 punch of Lacan and Kristeva is give up your fantasy. Give up your fantasy that your skin is a shell containing your subjectivity. This is not true at all. You're always in concert with the world. Your body's going in and out with the world all the time. Go ahead, take a breath. Right? Like we're breathing in and out. And when you breathe out, there's bits of spit coming out of your mouth. And all of this is the plurality of being. Right? The lack of clean and proper boundaries, and yet somehow that is not pleasurable to think about. We prefer this type of fantasized cleanliness that isn't really real. So again, I think that horror films are playing on these dynamics quite a bit. For Kristeva, the ultimate abject is the corpse. again, this is perfect for horror movies, right? Because the corpse, think about, have you guys seen a dead relative? Raise your hand if you,
Not yet.
raise your hand for dead people. Oh, it's actually a lot. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing that America in particular, we're not that into seeing dead people. You know what I mean? In a lot of other cultures, Mexico, I'm thinking of, you know, the dead person is in the house, you know, for a bit before decomp, so everybody can, or taken through the street, you know, so that everybody has a chance, you know, to experience the corpse version of this person before they put them in the ground or burn them or whatever they do. But we don't prefer that in America. We prefer either a mannequin corpse, you know, that's been drained of its bodily fluid and painted, or we prefer not to see it at all. And I wonder about that. I wonder why we think that is advantageous for us when no other cultures do that. I think there's are very few that I can think of historically. I think there might be something important about seeing a dead body and coming to terms with it in a very concrete way. Because the dead body, of course, is neither subject nor object. It is clearly abject. So if you've had the displeasure of seeing a loved one of yours be dead, we pretty much all share the common experience of looking at that corpse and saying, well, that's not my father. You know your father, you know what I mean? If it's somebody you know, you're looking at their dead body and you know it's not them, so it's not subject. It's definitely not subject, right? And yet, it can't be object because this person was a subject. And just because they're dead, their body can't be turned into an object, right? So it must be then abject. It must be the third category, right? And then what do you do with something that's neither subject nor object?
Dispose.
You object it, right? Like again, it must be objected. It must be done away with in order to sort of reestablish these normative ideas. So again, all of what we're talking about here with horror is about transgression. Who is the villain? You know, who is the deviant? You know, what is it telling us about society when we look at these stories? It tells us quite a bit, right? And what's abject in these stories? Returning to the notes, an earlier kind of, aside from Chris Davia, an earlier kind of normative idea about horror films would be from Wood. And Wood says that another way to read horror is in terms of surplus repression. Maybe, I don't know, clumsy psychoanalysis, but hey, let's just run with it. It works, you know, like fuck it, it works, let's just do it. So it's a surplus repression. The Lacanian in me wants to be upset about this, but again, we'll just go with it. Okay, so surplus repression generates a heterosexual, monogamous, capitalist, patriarchal member of the bourgeoisie. This is what the societal aspects of repression are designed to do, right? To kind of create these normative people who are heterosexual, capitalistic, you know, will be cut and pasted into the normative realm of being an American. Surplus repression may also make you a neurotic or a revolutionary, or both, right? So meaning, if there's been additional pressure applied on you, then that surplus repression may actually become detrimental and you may flip into being something else. So this would be, I think, the best example of this I can think of is Black Swan, right? Surplus repression. She was doing it to herself too, and she becomes completely neurotic, right? This just internalized, you know, a surplus, you know, repression, and of course, it just, she cannot stand. She breaks. What escapes repression from within must be dealt with by oppression from outside. So again, if you have some member of society who escapes the repressive, normative way of making a societal member, and they become, you know, a monster or a criminal or somebody who's transgendered or these things that have been considered so horrible in our society for so long, then society must deal with the problem. Right? If it becomes externalized, it must be dealt with. And again, this is what we see in horror films. Okay, there's 4 categories of societal repression, and they typically are sexuality, bisexuality, female sexuality, and childhood sexuality, right? So these are things that we're normally going to see repressed within Hollywood cinema. You're going to say, oh no, female sexuality is not repressed. I'm going to say, absolutely, I think that it is. Absolutely, I think that it is. I think more now than ever are we seeing female sexuality being repressed. What we're seeing in its place, and this is going to remind me when we get to road films, because it's nice. It's what we're seeing in the place of an active female sexuality, we're seeing an active violent female. So we're seeing violence work as a stand-in for a female being actively sexual. So if you go to these movies, like Black Panther, all these different movies, you will see women being very violent, Tomb Raider, etc. So you have this sort of, I would say, clumsy equation being made where female being violent equals female equality equals females are as good as men. This is troubling to me. I think we should deeply question it. Deeply question why the capacity to be violent equates equality. I don't think that it does. I would not like that to be true if that's what the proposition is. While at the same time, we don't see sexually active females in an active capacity. In a passive capacity, in a Lana Del Rey capacity, sure. But in an active capacity, I doubt it. Did anybody go see Ty Segall this weekend? Nobody knows who that is? All right. Okay. I thought it's a young person's thing. I thought maybe I could finally no. Okay. Okay. So otherness, the other then, is a figure that represents something external to the culture or to the self that is the site where what is repressed is projected out and fixed upon. Okay. There's no better figure of otherness than in Nazi Germany's the Jew. Right? There's no better figure of otherness where you simply just project any external threat that there might be and put it on this figure. Right now in America, we have Muslims, right? You just go ahead and take this entire population, scapegoat them, and project the societal problems onto them. Or refugees, or illegal immigrants, whatever it is of the day. They are the other that is perpetrating the imaginary horrors in our society. While again, meanwhile, the crops lay dying in California. So I don't know where we get food if we don't have people to pick the food. And let's remember, California is the 6th largest economy in the world. Right? That's how important California, particularly with its agriculture, is. I'm not talking about the 6th largest economy in America in terms of states. I'm talking about if you had the Californian economy in itself aligned with the world economies, it would be the 6th largest world economy. This is amazing. And right now the crops are dying as we speak because we have eliminated the class of people who pick the food. I don't know. I like food. I'm pro food, you guys. Call me crazy. Okay, so anyway, the other can be hated and disavowed. Typical others have been women, strangers, other ethnic groups, homosexuals, alternative ideologies, nature, and children. Right? So anything essentially that's not a patriarchal sort of male, white male, pretty much can be othered and used as a site of trauma within these movies to sort of be worked out and contained in order to reestablish the normative narrative. So there's also, again, the traditional sort of feminist framework for horror films. And this is worth paying attention to because thank God they stopped making those movies where I think that maybe 10 years, that every movie, it seemed like there was a serial killer killing white women, and Ashley Judd was a cop, and Morgan Freeman was some sort of benevolent older cop, and then Ashley Judd had to go track down the serial killer, and then I saw this movie 10 times at one point. I had to stop. It just kept being made over and over again. And then if you watch entire television franchises like Law and Order, all of these things, is it not almost the singular focus of these series to have the tortured female be victimized, and then let's just all figure out who the really, really evil bad guy is, and then we can eliminate them. But what that narrative does is it suppresses the idea that women are brutalized all the time by non-monstrous men. Right? If we can think that it's just a monstrous man out there who's preying on women, then we can find that monstrous man and we can do something with him. But that is a false narrative, right? Because isn't it more that really fine men all the time are overstepping and committing these crimes that must be dealt with? And I think we should not be afraid to talk about this in an open and frank way. But as long as we demonize certain types of male activity and imagine that they're just on the monster and project them on the monster, we're missing the point. We're missing the point entirely. And I think these movies with the serial killer going after the women, that all of this is a mask. It's a mask so that we don't actually have to deal with masculinity as such, as a culture. So women in horror movies, traditional horror movies are, they're always the site of aggression, unless you're dealing with a female monster like an alien, but that tends to be rare. So women do not appropriate the gaze. So when we talk about film studies a lot, there's the idea of the gaze, and the gaze is always masculine, right? Because the film directors have always been masculine. So you almost always have the camera gaze being a gendered gaze, and so you have the female to be looked at, and then there's the male who possesses the gaze who's looking at her, and then there's the camera that gets sutured into the male gaze, and hence the camera gaze becomes the male gaze looking at the female who's positioned to be looked at by the male gaze, right? And rarely do they return the gaze. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. We get to film noir, they do. Only really bad women return the gaze. But if you're a proper woman, you are to be looked at, and men look at you, and then if you're performing your gender poorly, you'll be killed. But if you're like in Taken, the daughter, this is another great part of Taken, right? You have the almost the trope of rom-coms where you have the good daughter, right? And she's good because of why? You saw the movie, don't lie. She's a virgin. Okay, so she's a virgin, so she's good. But her slutty friend is not a virgin, so she's punished and killed, right? So it's this very clear sort of virgin horror narrative where the virgin is the one worthy of saving, the one that he's justified in torturing and killing and doing whatever he needs to do to save the virgin, save the white female virtue, right? Whereas her friend who was not a virgin, it's sad, but she needed to die. What can I say? It's so sad. But she's, again, one of these improper women that needs to just be expended with. And none of them have the gaze. Okay, so horror film utilizes the monstrous woman again, all engulfing, primitive, and impure. It's usually linked with nature or aliens. So the monstrous feminine, it's less seen, but it's there. Frequently, though, in these more normative ones, young women are shown as somehow bad. Young women are frequently, there's something kind of dangerous and bad about them. And if you really get into it, what's wrong with them? They're kind of too sexy. I see you with your phone, Adrian. I know. Yeah. He's like, I'm in control of your camera. What are you going to do? Okay, so these women, really, what's their problem with these young women? It's like they're too sexy. It's like they're a little too alluring. It's like they're almost kind of asking for it. Is it almost the implication? And then they get attacked. Right? There's some sort of messaging going on here. So normative masculinity is also valorized in that the villain is defectively masculine. So we also play the game in these movies of what's the right type of masculinity. And of course the right type of masculinity is the hero. And then the villain is the wrong type of masculinity. Right? So the scar, like usually, oh my gosh, it's so frequently ethnic, right? It's so frequently an ethnic minority who's the villain. Or if it's a white man, he's usually sexually problematized. Like he's either usually impotent or a rapist or a sadist. There's something within his sexual constellation that is off. Or he's a defective cripple. There's something wrong with him. There's something that screams not normal masculinity, and therefore monstrous. Again, we're dealing with binary logic. There's no room for plurality in these situations. So again, we did cover the abject. The abject is simple. It's the underside of the symbolic system. We don't have to worry about that right now. We're not going to do, but really, this is what Kristeva's point is that there's the symbolic system, the world we're living in, of desks and cups and the subjects and objects. This is all the symbolic system. And then there's the underside of the symbolic. There's the unseen. And what that is, and going back to Georges Bataille, who Kristeva's stealing from radically, it's called the unformed. And what it means is it's dissembling. It's almost a Freudian death drive, if you will. It's the forces that take apart what is put together. So it's this idea that yes, there's this subjective reality, there's this world of symbolic representation, but at the same time that there's the symbolic represented world, there's also forces that are kind of working to dissemble that world. And that's the real danger. Identifying what these forces are and repressing them, eliminating them. That's the work of ideology. That's the work of genre films. You think it's nothing. You think you're just going to go see a movie, but these are what these movies are teaching you. That's what they're enculturating you to understand, is what needs to be othered, what you need in order to be a proper subject, and what's dangerous and what's not. And it reifies your cultural identification. Does that make sense? Do you guys have questions on that? Does it just sound like a lot of bullshit? You're like, I don't think so. Nothing. Silence.
It really relates to the culture industry.
It really does. He's referring to Adorno's idea about the culture industry and turning culture into a product. And and again, this would be similar to kitsch. If we go back to the Clement Greenberg article, he says that kitsch was produced in order to fill a void for the emerging working class. Remember, there was not a working class, right? There was not. There was peasantry. The Industrial Revolution created the working class, and then they needed cultural goods, and then we gave them kitsch, right? So we're still the working class. We still need cultural goods, so we're still being given kitsch, and it's keeping us taught about what our cultural role is. Yes?
So I know we're talking about film, but can these same ideologies be applied to music? Especially?
Absolutely.
Okay, because when you say kitsch,
Absolutely.
the first thing I think of is Bruno Mars.
Yes.
Yeah, that's like 100% kitsch.
Absolutely. Oh, my hate for that man is large.
Yeah, I actually because I feel that he is the number one perpetrator of cultural appropriation, and just
the number one. That's giving him more credit than I want to. I don't want to give him that much credit. I have a similar. I do. He rubs me wrong for many ways in that same sort of Taylor Swift rubbing me wrong way, where I think it's kitsch. I mean, what can we say? And I mean, from the last lecture, we have to know that kitsch is dangerous. It's not neutral, right? It's not neutral. And I think there's people who want to relegate these things as being unimportant. It's entertainment. As you guys know, you inspired me. Several of you got me to go see Black Panther. I went and saw Black Panther. Immediately I called it out as fascist cinema. I wrote a lecture. It's on the page for you. And I put it on my Facebook page, and it's amazing. It's amazing the people's response to it. It's amazing the way they want to say things like, one of them was, saw the film, didn't care for it, could care less if it's fascist. And these are people who on their page are calling out Trump for leading fascism in America. So they're anti-Trump, they're anti what they see happening in America, but when I'm trying to say that this movie in popular culture is actually aiding fascism in America, they resist that completely. They're like, no, it's stupid entertainment, how dare you try and intellectualize it? I'm like, because we have to. We have to intellectualize these things. They're not neutral. They're teaching us our cultural values. It's fascist. It's fascist, you guys. It's fascist cinema. Come on. You should know that better than anybody. I taught you. See it again. Read my notes if you haven't. How shall I say it? I was certain I was right when I wrote the notes, and then when I posted them both in my Fantasy Football League page and on my Facebook page, I became even more certain by people's response, because their responses proved to me the point. They proved to me the point. By the way, my Fantasy Football League, did a more proper job responding to it than my actual Facebook page, because they were smart enough, and these guys are like I think they're all white, mostly Boston patriot loving Italians, right? Like, so I really, my fantasy football team, it's like my white man think tank, you know what I mean? Like, I see what they're doing, and we get in there and we say horrible things to each other. It's fun, it's masculinity. What can I say? It's a part of the world that I don't not enjoy. And so because on that page, I can just say, you ignorant fucks, you didn't even read my source material and you want to attack me? Come on! You know what I mean? And then they get it. And they go, oh, nope, I'm a dummy. I don't know what you're talking about. It's only the people on my actual Facebook page who, with their willful ignorance, want to challenge me. And they want to use their feeling as the basis for their argumentation. Exactly what we talked about with Lenny Riefenstahl and Milan Kundera and all these people. They want to justify they want to use their feeling for why I'm wrong. And I'm not talking about my feelings, right? Like I'm talking about, I'm relying on scholarship to perform a cinematic critique. And they're coming back with me, yeah, but I just feel like the movie's like this. I'm like, please, take your feelings out of my intellectual discussion. Please. And then one of them actually let me show you this, because I think it's telling. I think there's something. If I have to log into Facebook, then maybe I won't, because it's, oh man, it's not going to just know me.
Maybe.
Oh, just know me, Facebook. Okay, all right. So clearly I won't do that. I will read it. I'll read it to you from my phone. Okay. So I'm going to get out my phone. Nobody else is allowed to. And hey, if I remembered my login for my Facebook, I would log in. You know, but I can't. So this is a 70-year-old white man who's anti-Trump, and he doesn't. What can I say? He is what he is. I've known him a long time. And he likes to have opinions. I'm not sure he read my critique at all. But he went ahead. Oh, this thing just gets more. 62 comments now. I'm getting really popular. This is good. I didn't think lecture notes. You know, I don't even social media. So it's just funny.
Let's just have a session where we read our Facebook comments. That'd be fun.
You know what? I feel like you're sort of trying to poke at me right now, and I'm just not going to have it, Adrian.
I'm saying we all should, because I got something like that too.
I know. I mean, it's not a bad idea. We should probably be writing papers on this stuff, right? Okay, so this is, let me see here if I can find this. It's getting buried, thank God. I thought I was going to have to delete it, and when you hear this exchange, you'll understand why. Okay, here it goes. And this is the new me, where I'm just not going to, like, it's my page, I'll have the last word, right? You know, for a long time, people just say dumb things, I'll delete it, whatever. But we don't have any more time for that as a society. I don't think so. I think if you're not willing to draw a hard line, then don't bring up the topic, right? So I brought up the topic, I must be willing to draw a hard line. Here we go. Didn't like the film much. I could care less if it's fascist. Me. Really? In this day and age, fascism can't happen without popular support. Him. Trump is a fascist buffoon. Me. Hitler was one too. And he had the most beautiful movies made to support his vision. Him. Hitler wasn't totally a buffoon.
What?
Do you hear? Are you with me?
Huh.
Do you hear where he's dragging my discussion? Do you hear where he's dragging my commentary? And I said, did you see him at the Olympics? Actually, since absolute power corrupts absolutely, he was a total buffoon by the late 30s. Yes, his early writing has a creepy logic Trump lacks. He says, yeah, he got the trains to run on time. This man's never been to Europe. Okay? Okay? All right? His dad fought in World War II. My grandfather fought in World War II. This man has never been to Europe, but now we're talking about Hitler's running the trains on time. Okay, I'm like, so did the Swiss. No fascism needed. And then here we keep going. I mean, I can't believe, it's unbelievable. Aren't the Swiss Germanic? He says. I go, I know. That's amazing, right? I go,
I don't know.
I said, are you seriously going to keep this going? Do you miss me that much? He lives on the Big Island. He hasn't seen me in a long time. I said, I could outclass you on all days on these topics. Do you remember when I was studying in Switzerland? Like, seriously. Like, what is happening? And he goes, yeah. So he does remember, right? And then he goes, I wouldn't say a new post, right? Because he's not going to let me have the last word. Good. But I wouldn't say you outclassed me, but you sure outworded me. And I said, if I didn't outclass you, then reference the 3 authors I utilized in my analysis immediately. I can, because I outclassed you on these topics all day, right? Okay. Because you reference 3 authors doesn't equate class. This was a movie. It's art. Art is subjective. Like Hitler, like the Hitler speech. Does he not sound like Hitler at this point? Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. I didn't care for the movie. I said, had you read my lecture notes closely or sound tag, you would realize you're proving my point. People think that their feeling-based responses equate scholarship, and it is ruining our country. Popular culture is always critical and is always politicized, and that is why we analyze it without feelings, but based around ideological clusters. I can't waste time on this anymore. I will have to delete this thread. You literally took my critique down to the level of tacit support of Hitler. Again, proving my point. Do you think you shut up?
No.
No.
He said it. He shouldn't.
Again, once again, your intellectual prowess is subjective.
Yes.
And then I said, as all is.
Yeah.
As all is, jackass. Like what? Is there somebody who has intellectual prowess that doesn't have subjective intellectual prowess? Can somebody tell me what that man's point was in that thread?
Sometimes you just get so deep in, like you're like, no, what? I'm not stopping. Like I'm already this deep.
Did he not dig his own grave though? I mean, does he not expose himself to be the like? I'm sorry. I mean, he's making my point. He made my point for me, and not bothering to read my post, coming at me with his feeling, and then continuing down the rabbit hole with his feeling. And this, you guys, is the problem with feelings. This is why the Brotherhood of Earth will be based on the kitsch. Remember, the first tier is your own subjective response. The second tier is the kitsch tier. Read the Milan Kundera. He's not wrong. Being connected with your feeling, with the brotherhood of man on earth, through the power of kitsch. This is not a safe place to be. This is fascism. Calling it out. Calling it out. If I need to do the lecture again, I will. Is everybody clear on my points? Okay, let's watch some horror movie. We can probably stop that if you want to. Adrian, thank you. And we will watch some. Look at all these movies I brought today.